I felt something was wrong the moment I turned onto the street. The rumble of a diesel engine tore through the morning air. My blood ran cold when I saw the yellow bulldozer crushing my 1967 Mustang, the only legacy from my late father. Right there in my driveway, HOA President Brenda Carmichael stood beside it, pointing straight at me as I jumped out of my car, screaming, "Your vehicle violates Article 7.3b. I have the right to confiscate it." My hand gripped something tight in my jacket pocket, forcing myself to stay calm. If you've ever dealt with an abusive HOA or a neighbor who turned your life into hell, you need to hear this story. She had no idea she was committing a crime right in front of the wrong person. What happened next will blow your mind. I had just finished a 12-hour night shift and wanted nothing more than to collapse into bed, but now I stood frozen on my own property, watching the bulldozer's arm swing down again. Metal screamed. The candy apple red paint, the same shade my father had chosen back in 1985, peeled away in twisted strips. My chest felt hollow. That car was not just a car. It was the last thing I had that still carried his presence. His hands on the steering wheel. I had spent 3 years restoring it after he passed. Every bolt and wire a conversation with his memory. Brenda climbed down from the bulldozer with the confidence of someone who believed herself untouchable. She was 49 years old, blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, wearing a navy blazer even at 7:30 a.m., like she was ready for a board meeting. Behind her stood a man in a gray suit, holding a leather folder, looking uncomfortable. "That's Gary Thornton, HOA attorney," she said, gesturing toward him with a smug smile. Gary avoided my eyes, shifting his weight from foot to foot. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere but here. "He's here to witness the lawful execution of HOA enforcement policy," Brenda continued. I clenched my jaw. Lawful. That word echoed in my head like a slap. I forced my voice to stay level. "Brenda, you need to stop this right now. This is my property. You have no legal authority to do this." She pulled a printed document from her blazer pocket and held it up like a trophy. Article 7.3b clearly states that any vehicle parked for more than 24 hours without a valid parking sticker is subject to immediate removal. I sent you 3 email warnings over the past 2 weeks. You ignored every single one. The HOA board voted on enforcement at our last meeting. It's all documented. I pulled out my phone, opened my email app, and searched for her name. Nothing. I checked spam, checked filters, and scrolled back 2 months. Nothing. I looked up at her. "I never received any warnings." "Brenda, not one." She shrugged, unbothered. "Not my problem if you don't manage your inbox." We followed the procedure. Around us, neighbors began to gather. Mrs. Dorothy Hayes, an elderly woman in her early 70s who lived 2 doors down, stood on her porch with her arms crossed, watching with a knowing frown. A younger couple I recognized but didn't know well stood by their mailbox, phones out, recording. No one stepped forward to help. No one said a word. They just watched. I realized then how much power Brenda had over this community, how much fear she had cultivated. People were afraid to challenge her because they had seen what happened to those who did. I took a step closer to the Mustang, or what was left of it. The roof had caved in. The dashboard my father had custom installed was crushed beyond recognition. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. Every angle. The bulldozer, Brenda, Gary Thornton, who flinched when I pointed the camera at him, the destroyed car. Brenda noticed and rolled her eyes. "Take all the pictures you want, Jake. This is completely legal." I did not respond. I just kept photographing, my mind already shifting into a different mode, the mode I used at work. Calm, methodical, evidence-focused. Then I noticed something. The dash cam I had installed 6 months ago was still blinking. Its little green light pulsed faintly near the rearview mirror mount, protected by the upper windshield frame that had somehow remained partially intact. It ran on an independent battery backup. Something I had added after a hit-and-run case I worked on last year taught me the value of continuous recording. That camera had been recording this entire time. Brenda did not know it. Gary did not know it. No one knew except me. I made sure not to look at it directly. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and met Brenda's gaze. "I want to see the meeting minutes where the board voted on this," I want to see proof you sent those emails. She waved a hand dismissively. All internal HOA business. Jake, if you want to contest this, you can file an appeal with the board. We meet next month. Next month. She was counting on me giving up, walking away, paying whatever fine she decided to impose. She was counting on me being like everyone else in this neighborhood who had bent under her pressure. But Brenda Carmichael had made one critical miscalculation. I was not everyone else. I reached into my jacket pocket and felt the weight of my badge. Not yet. I told myself. Not yet. I needed to do this the right way. I needed evidence. I needed a procedure. I needed the system to work the way it was supposed to. I looked at her one more time and said quietly, "I'll be seeing you soon, Brenda." She smiled, thinking she had won. I turned and walked back to my car, my mind already 3 steps ahead. The letter arrived the next morning. I had barely slept, my mind cycling through what Brenda had done. When I opened my mailbox at 9 a.m., there it was. A thick white envelope with the HOA logo embossed on the corner. I tore it open right there on the curb. The letter was printed on official letterhead, signed by Brenda Carmichael in looping blue ink. It demanded $15,000 in fines for violating parking regulations and obstructing HOA enforcement activities. I read it twice to make sure I was not imagining the number. $15,000. I had 10 days to pay, or the HOA would place a lien on my property. I sat down on the front steps, the letter trembling slightly in my hands. This was not just about the car anymore. This was about my home, my financial stability, everything I had worked for. Brenda was using the system like a weapon, burying me in paperwork and legal threats until I either paid up or gave up. I folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the envelope. Then I pulled out my phone and called the HOA office. A receptionist answered, chipper and polite. I asked to schedule a meeting with Brenda and the board. The receptionist put me on hold, then came back with a time slot for 2 p.m. that same afternoon. When I arrived at the HOA office, a small brick building tucked behind the community center, Brenda was already waiting in the conference room. Gary Thornton sat beside her, his gray suit perfectly pressed, his leather folder open on the table. Brenda gestured to the chair across from her like she was granting me an audience. Jake, I am glad you came. I assume you received our notice. I placed the letter on the table between us. I did, and I want to see the meeting minutes where the board voted to authorize this enforcement action. I want copies of the email warnings you claim you sent me. Everything in writing. Brenda's smile did not waver. She slid a thin stack of papers across the table. Here is the meeting summary from our last board session. As you can see, the vote was unanimous. I picked up the document and scanned it. The meeting had been held 3 weeks ago on a Tuesday night at 7 p.m. According to the notes, 7 board members were required for a quorum, but the signature page showed only 3 names: Brenda Carmichael, Daniel Carmichael, and Gary Thornton. I looked up. This says 3 people attended. Your bylaws require at least 7 members for a valid vote. This meeting does not meet quorum. For the first time, Brenda hesitated. It was barely a second, just a flicker in her eyes, a slight tightening at the corner of her mouth. Then she recovered. The other members participated remotely. It's all documented internally. I leaned forward. Then show me the documentation, call logs, video recordings, and email confirmations. If they participated remotely, there has to be a record. Her jaw clenched. That information is internal HOA business. Jake, we do not disclose operational details unless you file a formal records request. I pulled out my phone and set it on the table. Then consider this my formal request. I want all meeting records, all email correspondence related to my property, and all financial transactions involving enforcement actions over the past 3 years. Gary shifted in his seat, glancing at Brenda like he wanted permission to speak. Brenda's expression went cold. You are wasting everyone's time. The decision has been made. You violated the rules. Now you pay the consequences. I stood up, picking up my phone. We will see about that. I walked out of that office knowing exactly what I was dealing with. The meeting records were incomplete because the meeting had been a sham. The emails I never received were never sent. She was manufacturing justifications after the fact, counting on people being too intimidated to fight back. When I got home, Mrs. Dorothy Hayes was waiting on my porch. She looked smaller than usual, her shoulders hunched, her hands twisting together nervously. Jake, can I talk to you for a minute? I unlocked the door and invited her inside. She sat down at my kitchen table, glancing toward the window like she was afraid someone might see her. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly. 2 years ago, Brenda did the same thing to the Johnsons. Camper violation, fines, threats. They sold their house just to escape her. I helped Mrs. Johnson pack, and she told me everything. But Jake, there is more. Last month, I was at the community center when Brenda and her son Daniel were meeting in the back room. The door was cracked open. I heard them talking about buying properties on this street. Daniel runs a garage repair business, and he wants to expand his lot into a commercial space. Your driveway backs right up to the area he wants. I felt something click into place. This was not about parking regulations. This was about real estate. Brenda was using her position as HOA president to force me out so her son could buy my property cheaply. The fines, the intimidation, the threats. It was all part of a calculated plan. Mrs. Hayes reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Be careful, Jake. She has connections. She has money. A lot of people have tried to stand up to her, and they all lost." I looked at her and nodded. "Thank you, Dorothy. This helps more than you know." After she left, I sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. I started a new spreadsheet, labeling the columns date, event, evidence, witnesses. I was going to document everything, every letter, every conversation, every inconsistency. I was going to build a case so airtight that Brenda would not be able to talk her way out of it. Then I made a phone call. "Captain Monroe, it's Jake. I need some advice." My supervisor's voice came through calm and steady. "Jake, what is going on?" I told her everything. The destroyed Mustang, the $15,000 fine, the fake meeting minutes, the connection to Daniel's garage business. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then Captain Monroe said, "Jake, you know I cannot get involved officially unless there is evidence of a crime. But off the record, if you think this is fraud or embezzlement, you need to file complaints with the county clerk and the state real estate division. Do not use your badge to intimidate her. Do this by the book. If she is dirty, the system will catch her." I thanked her and hung up. I was not going to use my badge. Not yet, but I was going to use everything else I had. 3 days later, I received a notice from my bank. The subject line read, "Account hold notification," and my stomach dropped before I even opened it. The HOA had filed a lien against my property for $15,000. My bank had frozen a portion of my checking account to ensure payment, leaving me with just enough to cover basic bills, my savings, my emergency fund. Everything I had been setting aside for years was now locked behind a legal wall Brenda had built with a few signatures and a fake meeting. I called the bank immediately. The representative was polite but firm. "Mr. Sullivan, once a lien is filed with the county, we are required by law to hold funds pending resolution. You will need to resolve the matter with the HOA or contest the lien through the court system." I asked how long that would take. She paused. "Could be weeks, could be months." Brenda was not just attacking my property. She was attacking my ability to function, to pay bills, to live. That same afternoon, a post appeared on the neighborhood community message board. It was written by Brenda, titled, "Important Safety Notice Regarding Non-Compliant Resident." She did not use my name, but she did not have to. She described a homeowner who had violated multiple HOA regulations, refused to comply with enforcement actions, and was now threatening legal retaliation. She ended with a line that made my blood boil. "We must all remain vigilant to protect our community's standards." Within hours, the comments filled up. Some defended me, but others turned. One read, "If he can't follow simple rules, he shouldn't live here." The next morning, I ran into Tom, a neighbor I had always gotten along with. When he saw me, his face went stiff. He gave me a tight nod and walked past without a word. Brenda was isolating me, painting me as the problem, so no one would help. That night, I filed a public records request with the county clerk for all HOA meeting minutes, financial reports, and enforcement actions from the past 3 years. The request cost $42 and would take up to 10 business days. While I waited, I started looking for other families Brenda had targeted. I pulled property transfer records from the county assessor's office and cross-referenced them with HOA enforcement files I had requested. 2 names stood out: the Johnsons and the Ramirez family, both of whom had sold their homes within months of HOA disputes. I found a phone number for Mrs. Johnson through a forwarding address on the transfer documents. When I called, a woman answered, cautious and tired. I introduced myself and explained what had happened. There was a long silence. Then she said, "She did the same thing to us. Fined us for a camper. Threatened a lien. We sold below market value just to get away from her. But there was another family, the Ramirez family. They fought back harder. You should find them." I tracked down Carlos Ramirez through the same property records. Within an hour of my email, he responded and agreed to meet. The following evening, we met at a coffee shop halfway between our towns. Carlos was in his early 50s, graying at the temples, with the calm that comes from surviving something hard. He brought a folder with him, thick with printed emails and financial documents. "Brenda claimed our fence was 6 inches too high," he said, spreading the papers across the table. "She fined us $8,000. We hired a surveyor. The fence was compliant. We showed her the report. She ignored it. So we hired a lawyer and fought her in court. It took a year and cost us $12,000 in legal fees. But we won. The judge ruled Brenda exceeded her authority and ordered reimbursement. After that, I kept everything. I knew someone else would need it someday." I looked through the documents. There were emails from Brenda citing obscure HOA rules that did not exist in the actual bylaws. There were financial records showing the HOA had paid a company owned by Daniel Carmichael $47,000 over 18 months for landscaping and maintenance work that was never performed. Carlos pointed to one invoice. "See this? $2,200 for tree trimming on a date when no trees were touched. I have photos proving it. The whole thing is a shell game. Brenda finds people, pressures them to sell, and Daniel benefits every single time." He slid the folder across the table. "Keep this. Make copies. Someone has to stop her." When I got home, I added everything to my spreadsheet. I now had a pattern: 3 families targeted in 2 years, all using the same tactics: fake violations, inflated fines, and financial threats. And every time Daniel's business benefited. I cross-referenced the financial records Carlos had given me with public HOA tax filings. The numbers did not add up. The HOA had reported maintenance expenses of $93,000 over 2 years, but the work described in those invoices had never been completed. Brenda was not just abusing her power. She was embezzling from the HOA budget and funneling it to her son. I pulled up the dashcam footage from the morning Brenda destroyed my car. I had not watched it all the way through yet. Now I did. The video was crystal clear. Brenda's voice came through sharp and unmistakable. "This is what happens when people don't cooperate. Once we get this property cleared, Daniel can finally expand the lot like we planned." I replayed it 3 times. She had said it out loud, on camera, her motive, her plan, her confession. I saved the file to 3 separate drives and uploaded a copy to secure cloud storage. Then I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. I had the evidence. I had the pattern. Now I needed to decide how to use it. I spent the next 72 hours building a case that would hold up under scrutiny. This was not about revenge. This was about justice, and justice required precision. I organized everything into categories: financial records, witness statements, video evidence, HOA documents, and legal violations. Each piece was tagged, dated, and cross-referenced. By the end of the 3rd day, I had a file 87 pages long, and every page pointed to the same conclusion: Brenda Carmichael and her son Daniel were running a fraud scheme using the HOA as cover. The dashcam footage was critical. I contacted a certified forensic tech I had worked with on a burglary case last year. He owed me a favor after I helped expedite evidence processing on one of his clients. Within 2 days, he had the video professionally extracted and time-stamped. The footage showed Brenda standing beside the bulldozer at 7:32 a.m., gesturing toward my driveway. Her voice came through clearly: "Get this cleared fast. Once the property opens up, we can finally move forward with the expansion plan. Daniel's been waiting long enough." It was not a direct confession, but it was damning. Motive, intent, coordination. I made 4 copies, 1 encrypted USB, 1 in cloud storage, 1 with my attorney, and 1 with Captain Monroe. Next, I filed a formal complaint with the State Real Estate Division. The complaint detailed 7 violations of state HOA statute: failure to provide proper notice, conducting meetings without quorum, imposing fines without due process, and filing a lien without lawful authorization. I attached the fraudulent meeting minutes, the financial records showing payments to Daniel's company for work never performed, and copies of the emails that were never sent to me. The division acknowledged my complaint within 48 hours and assigned a compliance officer to investigate. Then I contacted Harriet Simmons, the attorney Carlos Ramirez had recommended. When I met her at her office on Thursday afternoon, I laid out the evidence. She took her time reviewing the documents, asking pointed questions about dates, signatures, and procedural timelines. After 20 minutes, she set the folder down and looked at me. "Jake, this is solid. Brenda violated multiple state statutes, and your documentation backs it up. We can file a civil suit, but more immediately, we can request an emergency HOA board meeting under State Code Section 5105 if a homeowner files a formal grievance with supporting evidence. The board is required to hold a meeting within 14 days. They cannot refuse." I asked what would happen at the meeting. She leaned forward. "We present your evidence in front of the entire community. We force Brenda to answer for every violation publicly. No closed doors, no fake minutes. Everything transparent." I signed the retainer that afternoon. Harriet filed the emergency meeting request the next morning, citing Section 5105. The HOA had no choice. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 7 p.m. While the legal process moved forward, I reached out to a reporter I had worked with 2 years earlier on a fraud case. Her name was Monica Torres, and she covered community stories for Channel 7. I sent her an email with a summary HOA president using her position to extort homeowners, backed by video and financial evidence. She called within an hour. "Jake, if your documentation is as strong as you say, this could be significant. Can I attend the meeting?" I told her yes. She said she would bring a crew. I also contacted the families Brenda had targeted. Mrs. Johnson agreed immediately. Carlos Ramirez said, "I have been waiting for this. I will be there." But one of the other families hesitated. The husband, a man named Greg, said, "Jake, I appreciate what you're doing, but we moved on, dragging this back up, testifying in public. It's hard. Let me talk to my wife." 2 days later, he called back. "We are in. Someone has to stop her." Mrs. Hayes also agreed to testify. She told me quietly, "I am old, Jake. Brenda cannot hurt me anymore. I will tell them what I have seen." The night before the meeting, I reviewed everything one final time. 87 pages. Dashcam footage with Brenda's voice. Financial records show $47,000 paid to Daniel's company for work never completed. Testimonies from 5 victims. Meeting minutes that did not meet quorum. A lien was filed without authorization. There was no room for denial. Tuesday arrived. I got to the community center an hour early. The room was already filling. Neighbors I had not seen in weeks were there. Curious, anxious, some clearly aligned with Brenda. Monica Torres set up her camera in the back. Harriet arrived with her briefcase, composed and ready. Mrs. Hayes sat in the front row. Carlos and the others sat near the aisle. At 6:55 p.m., Brenda walked in with Gary Thornton. She looked calm, unbothered, like this was routine business. She took her seat at the head table and glanced around the room with a faint smile. Gary looked less confident. He kept adjusting his tie, his eyes flicking toward the camera crew. At exactly 7 p.m., Harriet stood. "Good evening. My name is Harriet Simmons, and I represent Jake Sullivan under State Code Section 5105. Mr. Sullivan has the right to address this assembly regarding multiple statutory violations by this HOA board. We will be presenting documentation, video evidence, and witness testimony. This meeting is being recorded for legal purposes." Brenda's smile faltered. The room went silent. I stood up, holding a USB drive in one hand and the printed file in the other. Brenda's eyes locked on mine. For the first time since this started, I saw uncertainty flicker across her face, and I began. I connected the USB drive to the projector, and the screen behind Brenda lit up with the HOA logo. The room held about 60 people, neighbors I had seen for years but never really known. They sat in folding chairs, some leaning forward, others with arms crossed. Brenda sat at the head table, her posture stiff, controlled. Gary Thornton shuffled papers beside her, his fingers tapping nervously against the folder. I took a breath and started. My name is Jake Sullivan. 3 weeks ago, HOA President Brenda Carmichael ordered the destruction of my 1967 Ford Mustang with a bulldozer, claiming I violated parking regulations. What I am about to show you is evidence that this action, and others like it, were part of a coordinated fraud scheme. The room erupted in murmurs. Brenda shot to her feet. "This is outrageous. You are disrupting an official meeting with baseless accusations." Harriet stood calmly beside me. "Mrs. Carmichael, under State Code Section 5105, Mr. Sullivan has the legal right to present evidence during an emergency grievance hearing. If you interrupt again, you will violate state statute. Sit down." Brenda's lips pressed into a thin line. She lowered herself slowly, gripping the edge of the table. The murmurs grew louder. I clicked on the first slide. This is the meeting minutes from 3 weeks ago, where the board allegedly voted to authorize enforcement action. According to the HOA bylaws, 7 board members are required for a quorum. Only 3 signatures appear: Brenda Carmichael, Daniel Carmichael, and Gary Thornton. This meeting was invalid. People turned to look at Brenda. She opened her mouth, but Harriet cut in. "We have verified with 5 other board members that they were not notified and did not participate remotely. Their sworn statements are attached to the evidence file." Gary shifted uncomfortably. His eyes darted toward the door, then back to his folder. He had been quiet all night, but now he looked trapped. I clicked to the next slide. Brenda claimed she sent me 3 warnings. I never received one. Server logs from my email provider confirm no messages were sent from the HOA domain during the stated time frame. The warnings do not exist. The room went silent. I moved to the financial records. Over 18 months, the HOA paid Carmichael maintenance and repair $47,000 for landscaping services. That company is owned by Daniel Carmichael. I have time-stamped photographs proving the work described in these invoices was never performed. Carlos Ramirez stood up. "I documented every invoice during my time here. No work was done. This is fraud." Brenda's face flushed, but she stayed seated, her hands clenched into fists on the table. I clicked to the dashcam footage. The room watched as the bulldozer tore into my car. Then Brenda's voice played over the speakers. "Get this cleared fast. Once the property opens up, we can move forward with the expansion plan. Daniel's been waiting long enough." The reaction was immediate. Gasps. Someone in the back said, "She said it out loud." Another shouted, "That's her motive right there." Brenda stood, her voice rising but wavering slightly. "That is out of context. I was referring to legitimate community planning." I paused the video. "There is no context where destroying private property to benefit your son's business is legitimate. This is a conspiracy." Mrs. Hayes stood from the front row, her voice steady despite her age. "I have lived here 32 years. I watched Brenda push out 3 families with these exact tactics. Every time, Daniel's business gained. This must stop." Then Gary Thornton stood. His face was pale. His tie loosened like he had been pulling at it all evening. "I need to say something." Brenda turned toward him, her eyes wide, her voice sharp. "Gary, don't." He ignored her. "I was hired 6 months ago to provide legal counsel. When Brenda told me about Jake's vehicle enforcement, I advised her that it required proper notice and a board vote. She assured me both had been done. I did not verify. I should have. Over the past month, I began to suspect inconsistencies. When Jake requested records, I realized the procedural gaps were too large to ignore. I cannot continue representing actions I believe are unlawful. I am withdrawing as counsel effective immediately and will cooperate fully with any investigations." The room exploded. Voices overlapped. Some shouting at Brenda, some demanding answers. Brenda stood frozen, her carefully maintained composure cracking. Her jaw worked, but no sound came out. Then the door at the back of the room opened. 2 uniformed police officers walked in, followed by Captain Monroe. She met my eyes and gave a small nod. I had called her that morning after Harriet confirmed the evidence package was complete. The district attorney had reviewed it and signed the warrant by 3 p.m. The timing was deliberate. I turned back to Brenda. "Brenda Carmichael, these officers are here to serve you with an arrest warrant. You are being charged with willful destruction of property, embezzlement of HOA funds, and fraud. Your son Daniel is being arrested at his business location right now." One of the officers stepped forward. "Ma'am, please place your hands behind your back." Brenda did not resist. She stood still as the cuffs clicked into place, her face drained of color, her breathing shallow, as they led her toward the door. She looked at me one last time. Her voice was barely audible. "I was protecting this community." I did not respond. There was nothing left to say. The officers escorted her out. Monica Torres's camera captured every moment. The room remained silent for several seconds after the door closed. Then someone in the middle row started clapping. Others joined. Not everyone, but enough. Mrs. Hayes reached over and squeezed my hand. Carlos nodded at me from across the room. I stood there, exhausted, holding the USB drive in my hand, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle over me. It was over. Brenda was done, and the community had seen everything. The courtroom was packed 3 months later when the sentencing hearing took place. I sat in the second row with Harriet on one side and Mrs. Hayes on the other. Carlos and the other families Brenda had targeted filled the rows behind us. The judge, a woman in her mid-60s with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes, reviewed the case file one final time before speaking. Brenda sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, her blonde hair no longer pulled tight, her face drawn and pale. Daniel sat beside her in a separate section, his own attorney whispering something he clearly did not want to hear. The weight of what they had done was about to come down in full. The judge began. "Brenda Carmichael, you have been found guilty of willful destruction of property, a Class E felony, embezzlement of HOA funds totaling $47,000, a Class D felony, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The evidence presented in this case was overwhelming. You abused your position of trust within your community to extort, intimidate, and financially harm your neighbors for personal gain. You used the HOA authority as a weapon, and you did so with calculated intent. The court sentences you to 4 years in state prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. You are ordered to pay restitution for $122,000 to Mr. Jake Sullivan, covering the value of his vehicle, the fraudulent fines, and his legal expenses. Additionally, you are permanently barred from holding any position of authority within any homeowners association in this state for 15 years under State Real Estate Code Section 5105. Brenda's shoulders sagged. Her attorney placed a hand on her arm, but she did not react. The judge turned to Daniel. "Daniel Carmichael, you have been found guilty of aiding and abetting embezzlement and conspiracy to commit fraud. You knowingly participated in a scheme to defraud the HOA and profit from the forced sale of properties. The court sentences you to 2 years in state prison and orders you to pay a fine of $50,000. Your business license is revoked, and you are prohibited from operating any contracting or maintenance business in this state for 10 years. Daniel stared straight ahead, his jaw tight, saying nothing. The judge closed the file. This case is a reminder that positions of power, no matter how small, carry responsibility. When that power is abused, the law will respond. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down with a single sharp crack. Outside the courthouse, Monica Torres was waiting with her camera crew. She had followed the case from the emergency HOA meeting all the way through the trial. Her coverage had sparked a statewide conversation about HOA accountability and oversight. She approached me with a microphone. "Jake, how does it feel to finally have justice?" I thought about that for a moment. It feels like the system worked the way it was supposed to. It took time. It took effort. But when you have evidence, when you follow the process, justice can happen. No one should have to live in fear of their HOA or any authority that forgets it exists to serve, not to control. She thanked me and moved on to interview Harriet. I stood on the courthouse steps, watching people walk past, feeling something I had not felt in months: relief. The restitution check arrived 2 weeks later. $122,000, $85,000 for the Mustang, $15,000 for the fraudulent fine, and $22,000 for legal fees and damages. I deposited the check and immediately started searching for a replacement car. It took me 3 weeks, but I found one. A 1967 Ford Mustang Fastback, same year as my father's, though a different color, deep blue instead of candy apple red. It was not the same car. It never would be. But it was a continuation, a way to honor what had been taken and rebuild what mattered. The day I brought the new Mustang home, I parked it in the same spot where the old one had been destroyed. I opened the trunk and carefully placed a framed photograph inside my father, standing beside the original Mustang in 1985, his hand resting on the hood, smiling. I stood there for a long moment, looking at the house, the driveway, the neighborhood that had tried to break me and failed. Then I noticed something. The small green light on the new dashcam I had installed was blinking steadily, recording, witnessing, ready. Mrs. Hayes had been elected the new HOA president in an emergency vote held 2 weeks after Brenda's arrest. Her first act was to commission a full audit of the HOA's finances and rewrite the bylaws to include transparency measures, term limits, and mandatory open meetings. She invited me to attend the first board meeting under the new rules. I went. The room was different. People spoke respectfully. Decisions were made by actual votes. It felt like what a community was supposed to be. After the meeting, Mrs. Hayes pulled me aside. "Jake, you gave a lot of people hope. You showed them that standing up to abuse is possible. Thank you." I told her the thanks belonged to everyone who had testified, everyone who had kept records, everyone who refused to let fear win. A few weeks later, I was sitting on my porch when Tom, the neighbor who had avoided me during the worst of it, walked over. He stopped at the edge of my driveway, hands in his pockets, looking uncomfortable. "Jake, I owe you an apology. I believed Brenda. I thought you were the problem. I was wrong. I am sorry." I nodded. "I understand. She was good at making people believe her. What matters is that the truth came out." He looked at the new Mustang. "That is a beautiful car." I smiled. "Thanks. It is a reminder." He nodded and walked back to his house. It was not a long conversation, but it was enough. Justice is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet, procedural, and built on evidence and patience. It is not about revenge. It is about accountability. It is about making sure that power, no matter how small, is held to the same standards we expect from everyone else. Brenda Carmichael thought she could use the system to crush anyone who stood in her way. She was wrong. The system, when used correctly, protects people. It just takes someone willing to fight for it. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever faced injustice and wondered whether fighting back was worth it, I hope this gives you an answer. Stand firm, gather your evidence, follow the process, and support those who shine a light on these stories, because accountability thrives in transparency. Thank you for standing with Karma Clause.